Hello everyone. Welcome everyone to attend the activity today. Oh, let me pull way back a bit. So, since it's the afternoon, it is an engagement evening activity. It's actually been done for many times already since 2001. So it's been run for over 10 years already. So we'll continue our activities and work on this area. So pass on my to Jeff. So CDI, oh, it's a bit loud because of the equipment. We can't really handle it. So CDI has done a lot of researches on politics. So we have paid lots of attention on different social issues. For example, like social development, the minimum wage, media, culture. We have followed up on everything. So over these years, we have done a lot of similar activities so that we can have different experts or even government bodies to communicate with the public about these events. So it's been over 10 years already, over decades. Another organization is Incu-Lab, which mainly focuses on doing innovative activities, including politics innovation. So it's been done for many years as well. Hopefully in the future we can communicate with different parties, and after the sharing, let's hope that you can have time to discuss with each other and give us feedbacks about the topics today and give feedbacks to Francis Lee as well. So let's have George and welcome him here. We would like him to share about his opinions.
We're constantly being bombarded with information. Can you hear? Okay. Okay? Yeah. All right, okay. So we're constantly being bombarded with information. And the big problem we now have, because it comes from all angles, even Donald Trump, is we don't know what's true and what's not true. So this afternoon's topic on fact-checking is a very pertinent topic, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing what Professor Francis Lee has to say about it, and I think it'll be a very interesting afternoon. Thank you very much.
So without further ado, we're a bit late for our event, so let's introduce Francis again. But I don't think it's necessary because I know a lot of people have read his book. It's not just about fact-checking or not about like disinformation, but his books has include a lot of different topics regarding to media and social events. So these are all the aspects that Professor Lee worked on, so let us pass our time to him directly. So thank you, Jeff. Thank you for CDI invitation. So the topic today is about fact-checking, just like what Jeff has said. Over the past years, I rarely put on this topic because it's not my main research focus. So today we will talk about the topic about fact-checking. Since it's, just like I've said, it's not the topic that I mainly focus on, but I still talk about this topic. It's because over the 2 years I have conducted a research project related to this topic. So we still have something called public policy crime in the governmental department that they put funding on. So this is a project that I'm working on. It is related to the development of Hong Kong fact-checking. Therefore, the sharing today will be based on my research project to talk about the background of fact-checking. I presume a lot of you all will be familiar with the topic about fact-checking, or even you are some professionals in doing that, but still I'm going to talk about the backgrounds of it, and later I will talk about some of the findings in my research projects. And even after that, I will use a survey experiment to share my results of that to really see if fact-checking is actually effective. Those so-called fact-checked materials, like after people reading them, will the people actually change their beliefs or their stance, or even at least change their understanding about certain topics, whether the issue is true or not? So this will be something that we'll talk about later. So the words on the slides may be a bit not clear, but it's okay. So first of all, I want to talk about the background of fact-checking. So fact-checking has developed for over 20 years already, but it really depends on how you define fact-checking. If you work in the news media field, then fact-checking is something that you do every day, no matter you write your reports. There are some fact-checking that you need to do to prove whether the evidence is true or not. For example, I write about a report. The people in charge will actually conduct a fact-checking about the report I write on. So I have worked on the main board and helped them to write different contents as well, like 3,000-ish words. I've written that much, but the editor really paid close attention to fact-checking all the content and even judge or challenge about the truth of my content as well. So this is how the news media organization has always worked. But when we talk about fact-checking to the general public, a lot of time is not about the internal working of news media organization, but it's actually about those so-called factual claims that have been publicized. For example, the words said by Donald Trump, or some information that's on social media platforms. But whether these public information are true or not, so this is those so-called fact-checking that the general public do, and we actually have people who specialize in doing fact-checking to help and try to see if these information is true or not. So this is the so-called fact-checking that we talk about nowadays. So this form of fact-checking, check already publicized information, you can actually date it back, way back before 2005. Actually, some American organizations had started doing these type of fact-checking. If you put it in the American historical and social context, the reason that they have these form of fact-checking is actually because, to some certain extent, in some Western countries, with their political development in media, they develop to a certain stage when the manipulation is very vital, very strong, no matter to public information, no matter to public beliefs. Those media organizations realize they need to do more to stop the manipulation. So to those Western media organizations, they actually has a form of self-judgment or self-criticism when they do fact-checking. When we talk about fact-checking on news, do you actually know the news reported on the TV is real? Are those so-called facts actually true? Because usually they are just what the source said to be true. But a lot of time it's difficult for them, for us to actually find the truth of the fact. For example, when you listen to the weather reports, you basically will believe in everything the weather report said because this is what they say, right? How can you fact check if the weather report done by the weather organization is actually true or not? You actually don't do that because you naturally just believe that they are real. So in general situation, A lot of times, news media fact-checking relies on sources. If those sources are reliable, then the organization or the associations of that society is actually reliable as well. It means so as well. Because there's no point of you to purposely fact-check those sources that you already believe to be true. But in a lot of American or Western countries, they don't believe in that because there are a lot of political figures who do a lot of bold speeches. And in that situation, people will then start have a form of judgment to see if those things that's said by the public figures are actually true or not. Therefore, fact-checking start to become a trend. So when fact-checking began 20 years ago, the trend is actually originated as a form of political fact-checking. But nowadays, when we talk about fact-checking in Western countries, we can generally divide them in two types of fact-checking. First is general term of political fact-checking. It means that they will fact-check whatever speech done by those political public figures. And around 10 years ago, when social media platforms developed really quickly, there's another form of fact-checking arise. It's not just about political public figures anymore, but about those information surrounded on social media platforms. There are a lot of false information on social media platforms, mainly because there's no checking on social media platforms themselves. And secondly, those information surrounded on social media platforms a lot of times are off context. Lots of my friends from the media field has always been careful about their work, but sometimes they will still make mistakes and share the wrong information. For example, they will share news that's actually from 3 years ago as news up for today. So these types of mistakes is inevitable on social media platforms. When I read Facebook, Threads, or Instagrams, we will come across a poster that be like, what? This is actually news from 3 years ago. Why is it on here? Because one characteristic of social media platform is time collapsing. Every day that you see online without viewing carefully, you actually will not know when that accident actually happened. So there are more false information on social media world. Therefore, fact-checking has evolved from political fact-checking into social media debunking work that mainly focus on the false information on social media platform. So there are actually some early controversies about fact-checking because it is not an easy work to be done. A lot of scholars will actually challenge the epistemology behind fact-checking, but due to time constraint, I will not take into detail about this topic. So there can be a lot of limitations when it comes to fact-checking. How many contents in the world can actually be fact-checked? For example, whenever I say something that seems a bit ambiguous, it's already difficult for you to fact-check. Because you can only fact-check information that are more solid and concrete. But when the idea is a bit ambiguous, it's already difficult to fact-check. So sorry for the example I'm about to pull out. It seems a bit sensitive. So if you try to fact-check this issue, can you actually do that? No, because that definition of that issue is already very ambiguous. So if you want to fact-check the claim, it's actually very difficult. Therefore, there can be a lot of limitations for fact-checking. And when you actually conduct it, there will be bias involved when you do the fact-checking. And in different social situations, there may be some certain organizations that volunteer to do fact-checking, but are they actually doing fact-checking, or are they actually using this opportunity to do something as a promotion, like propaganda? So in different social contexts, there may be different forms of fact-checking, but despite all these limitations, at least we can say that over the past decades in the global development, there is a specialization in doing fact-checking. So with pragmatism, this is something that people focus on when doing fact-checking now. So not talking about the philosophical stuff, but if you actually do it practically with the common culture and common language that's shared around the world, there are actually facts in the world, right? So if some society develop to a certain stage when a political figures can really lie in front of the public, or where the social media can really spread a lot of obviously false information, then this is a situation that we need to handle. So the so-called consensus of pragmatism is that we do know the limitations of fact-checking, but in reality, if the society is in such situation, there are certain things that we can actually do in order to do the fact-check. And with globalization over the decades, America and different countries start to do fact-checking. So there are two sources that you can look up. So a university in America has done a list about all the fact-checking works done in the world. You may follow this page, Reporters Lab, to see. It shows all the fact-checkers, about 100 of them around the world. It may not be the full list, but at least they collected other information and make a list for people to make reference on. And there are also more social media platforms like Meta that they started to conduct collaborations about fact-checking. So if you have the news, then you will know that one of the controversy in the early new year is that Facebook will stop working with fact-checker, but around the entire America, Meta and Facebook will still conduct some simple collaborations with some smaller scale fact-checking organizations. They will have these organizations to check the information, and then they will report back to Facebook or Meta. So often you will see a post on Meta or Facebook that read like blue fact-checking. And another thing is that fact-checking is now being more specialized. Another really important source from America, in the University of Maryland, they have an institute that focuses on doing fact-checking. It is called International Fact-Checking Network, IFCN. It is an organization development underpointed institute. It is international. So for the fact-checking organizations in Hong Kong, they can actually join or get approved by this IFCN organization. There are actually requirements or criteria that fact-checking organizations have to fulfill, listed or set by IFCN, about the transparency, of methodology, open and honest corrections. If you fulfill all these criteria, then those fact-checking organizations can try and become a signatory of IFCN and get their approval. For different organizations around different countries or regions, the IFCN will actually provide fundings to them as well. So you can see that fact-checking is getting globalized and more professional. Same for Hong Kong. If you look back to the first research I've done on fact-checking, in 2021, I've done a research about the 2019 social movement archive. It involves some of the fact-checking. I've written a few reports about the fact-checking after 2019 social movement. So organizations that are actually doing fact-checking in 2019 actually is not on the list. CUHK Media is a Facebook page. It's been there for over decades already. But in 2022, fact-checking become more professional and specialized. And there are some relatively more reputational fact-checking agencies that start to arise. We have 4 of them. If you look at the list that I've just mentioned, these 4 organizations are the ones that always pop up on them. The first one is AFP.hk. AFP has their own fact-checking team. And under their team, they actually has ASP Hong Kong, a sub-team that specializes in doing fact-checking in Hong Kong. And for Fact-Check Lab, it is run by social activists, some NGO or former journalists. It is a public or social association that specializes in doing fact-checking. And the other 2 is run by university. And the lab, it is an organization under Journalism and Media Center. A unit instead. And the other one is by the Center of Fact-Checking at the Baptist University. So these are the fact-checking associations in Hong Kong and the brief landscape. So these 4 organizations have all mapped the entry of IFCN, and no matter about their own bases, their expertise, these 4 are all the relatively more reputational or more professional fact-checking organizations. So how does fact-checking organizations actually do their jobs? So to my understanding, if we don't talk about those complicated stuff, but usually, first, they have to find sources that can be fact-checked. Different organizations may have different practices. Some will just browse on the internet, some will just browse on social medias. As a general citizen, you can actually find information that you can fact-check as well. But when some big issues arise, these fact-checking people will take the initiative to do some keyword searching to fact-check some certain information. Even some readers will provide sources as well. They will contact the fact-checking organizations and ask them to do the fact-checking. But of course, if the readers provide these sources to them, sometimes it can get a bit messy because readers can continuously provide sources to them. Therefore, these organizations will list it clearly that certain things cannot be fact-checked. So readers, please don't ask them to fact-check something like opinions. So once you collected all these sources and information, those fact-checking people will make a judgment about values, conduct value checking. For example, when you do news have their own value. As a journalist, you will report on different topics and things. So you have to be able to judge and see whether that thing is actually worth being reported. There are a lot of disinformation or misinformation in the world, and with limited in time, it's important for you to judge whether that information is worth to be fact-checked. And you also have to consider how much of an effect that source will impose on society or to the general public. And to add on, about whether the information can be fact-checked. Just now we've mentioned the so-called checkable sources usually has a factual claim that you're actually checking the claim of it. And secondly, the fact can actually be checked. So in news view, we will conduct an investigation about the news report. But fact-checking, no matter it's about the manpower, the time that people devote in, we usually fact-check something that can be easily checked. When we're investigating on a news report is a different matter because it would take a much longer time and more manpower behind to do it. And fact-checking is obviously not that. Some claims are not like theoretically unable to be checked, but more be like if you want to check the claim, it will take up to more than 3 months. So this is the difference between fact-checking and investigation. So we have interviewed some fact-checking bodies in the organizations. If those sources is an obvious satire, then they will not conduct the fact-checking because there's no point to that. It will be a waste of time. And let me briefly mention a lot of projects are actually done. We call it improval researches. It is a content analysis. I will highlight some of the figures and numbers, just a few of that, or else it will be boring. So the analysis show that in 2020 June and January of 2024, within these 3.5 years, 5 of the fact-checking organizations are listed here: AFP-HK, NE, BUFC, FCL, CUHK. So the report has collected the reports that are published by these fact-checking organizations, and they conduct a content analysis to see what they actually fact-check when they're doing the fact-checking. So some figures that can provide you all a sense about what the fact-checking organizations in Hong Kong are actually doing. So, for example, context of claims. So when you conduct fact-checking in Hong Kong, of course, there will be claims or arguments that are related to Hong Kong, like COVID. It is directly related to Hong Kong. However, are there really that much misinformation circulated in the internet in Hong Kong that are actually worth fact-checking? The truth is no. Not every misinformation are actually related to Hong Kong or are actually that important enough to affect Hong Kong. Some of them will affect Hong Kong citizens and the Hong Kong society, but not all of that. So based on the figures, let's look at Incu-Lab and BUFC. The reports that they conducted are actually international. For example, 54.8%. A lot of them are actually international. For BU is 64%. And second to that is mainland China. The only exception is that Kaoyim is very local. About 58 or 68% they do are actually related to Hong Kong. So these are their so-called context of claims in reports. But if you talk about the topics of claims in reports, about their diversity, for those related to politics, for example, AFP has 30%, ANE has 40%, Fact Check Lab have about 30% as well. So you can see that not many organizations has done fact-checking on domestic politics. Their diversity is actually not that different among different organizations. But one thing to point out, Kaoyim has a particularly high number on doing fact-checking about internet fraud. It is a topic that Kaoyim especially like to do, but the rest you can see that their number is actually really low. But anyway, other than that, mainly they do fact-checkings on domestic politics and social issues the most. And about the identity of claim makers. When you check a claim, who actually made the claim? So first, no matter it's AFP, Incu-Lab, or BU, or Kaoyim, many of the claims being checked are actually internet user because they always check the information circulated online. Because it is harder for you to identify the claim maker if it is published by an internet user. So usually we'll just generalize it and categorize it into internet user. So BU actually up to 80%, Fact Chat and Kaoyim are around 60%. Oh, Kaoyim is actually 40%. But Kaoyim has another category called social media page that they fact checked on. So social media page is for those claims that can be identified to their source of pages that being published. But one thing I want to point out is, so will the Hong Kong fact-checking organizations fact-check what the government officials say? Or what those mainstream media say? So certainly it's actually relatively less in compare. AFP doesn't really care about don't really do fact-checking on these aspects. Incu-Lab is even less, and BU is 1.3%. Fact Check Lab is a bit more, 12%-ish. Kaoyim is 3.1%. Therefore, in general, just like I've put it at the beginning, for fact-checking, originally in America, they mainly do fact-checking on political-related things to check on what the political figures say, and for the other half is mainly focused on the debunking of misinformation on social media. But in Hong Kong now, overwhelmingly is mainly focused on social media information debunking rather than political related topics. But sometimes they will still fact check what, for example, certain district official says. So at least when there are certain claims being made, they can actually be fact-checked. But one thing to point out, Fact-Checking Lab actually loves fact-checking those information that are reported by social media organizations. So this is what Fact-Check Lab specifically like to do, and especially done this more than the other organizations. Yeah, let me skip some slides because of time constraint. Lastly, one thing to remind, just as we have mentioned, when fact-checking organizations have to release and publish their report's outcome, they have to provide the source of the fact-checking. They cannot just simply say that I have done the fact-checking and call it a day. Nope. In 2019-ish, something is really popular at that time was that when you visit Facebook, you will see people share a post with a hashtag saying fact-checked. But it's actually wrong. Like, we don't know actually how that person do a fact-checking. When you actually do fact-checking, it's not just a claim that they made being fact-checked, but instead, the fact-checking actually need to publish the entire fact-checking process, or even provide the original materials as well, for example, like a link. For example, you fact check and show that, oh, that picture is false, and show that that picture is edited. It's because through the process, you're able to track back some editing process done on this picture. So if you want to fact check this picture, the way you need to report it is that you need to include the link and let people being able to trace back to that picture when you do the fact checking. If fact-checking is done well or in a professional way, they should not just tell you about the results, but they should tell you about the entire fact-checking process, so that as a reader, when you have time, you can do the fact-checking yourselves based on their process. So that fact-checker will not require to readers to 100% take their words, but actually provide the sources and methods to the readers as well. So with the fact-checking that has original materials, over 90% of them actually have access to original material, or the process being described in the report. A lot of them actually included in the report as well. Of course, if you want to describe the process, it can be quite lengthy. But to my understanding, this is actually one of the dilemma those fact-checkers have. If you want to be professional, you have to be detailed about your process. But a lot of times in social media, people will not have the patience to read these lengthy information. But at least we can see that a lot of fact-checking posts will describe their fact-checking process. So this is the result of content analysis. And with fact-checking, we can also know that when we do fact-checking, they can have different obstacles. Because two of the fact-checking organizations is actually run under a university, so they will have their own certain limitations. And how fast and how wide can those fact-checking results being passed, they actually have a limitation as well. So I want to use 50 minutes to talk about what I've mentioned before. When I do the project, a question that I especially want to know: after people reading the fact-checking report, will people actually believe in the fact-checking report, or will they actually adopt their ideas and beliefs? In my research projects, I've conducted 2 experiments. I can talk about one of that. So when I conduct the experiments, my idea is that when there is a statement or a claim that you try to fact check, but a lot of times, you can actually divide that statement or claim into 3 layers. So first one is misinformation beliefs, second is claim beliefs, and third one is background beliefs. So what are they? For instance, oh, I actually have a picture there, but it got missed. So for example, let me pick some example in the 2019 social movement. At that time, there were claims that among the protesters, there were problems of active social activities in there. And online, there were pictures circulated saying or pointing at those protesters. Korean media has done a lot of fact-checking for this issue, but what they're fact-checking is actually a picture. And that picture itself is the misinformation beliefs. It is a piece of evidence. But the claim is actually not from the picture, but the claim that some certain protesters has done certain activities. The claim actually have background beliefs as well. People have formed some certain belief because they think or they impose their own perspectives with their own background to the claim that they're making. So when you're doing fact-checking, what you're addressing is actually the misinformation. But when you address the misinformation, does it mean that you can address the claim belief or the background belief as well? No, that's not the case. Just like you're doing a lawsuit. I think that person is guilty. I provide the evidence. People can disprove my evidence, but if I still think that person is guilty, then I will still think that person is guilty. Even though I've eviscerated the evidence, it doesn't mean that my claim is not upheld by myself. So I want to address this problem that actually exists. So therefore, I'm doing this experiment. When I'm showing some fact-checking reports to the general public, will these reports actually change those misinformation beliefs, claim beliefs, and background beliefs of those citizens? So my experiment is... Oh no, all my pictures are missing. They are not able to be shown. Yep, they're all gone. All the pictures are gone for some reason. Anyway. So I can just only describe it myself. The case is that, because I'm doing an experiment, right? I want the experiment to be true. So I actually find those misinformation online, since it's difficult for me to fabricate myself. So I find some pictures that are edited or so-called out of context about mainland China having female athletes. But once you look at the female athletes on the picture, you won't think that she is a female. So there are these types of pictures circulated online. I have encountered 3 fact-checking reports conducted about these 3 pictures. One of the pictures are actually edited. It's actually edited to show or let that female athlete look like a male athlete, to exaggerate the entire thing, and then claim that they are doing falsification of gender. Another one is about CUHK. So the picture is that in the picture, how he was standing next to a male-looking athlete, and people then claim or say that that person is falsifying their gender. But that picture is actually edited because it is specifically cropped to show how he with a male athlete, and that male athlete is actually a male athlete, and people are actually making a false claim about it. And the third picture is about a weightlifting athlete. When that athlete is weightlifting, it seems that that person contains some male genitals. That picture is actually true, however, it is used in another context. So these three pictures are all related to gender falsification of Chinese athletes. And they are all fact-checked by Hong Kong fact-checking unit. So the experiment I conducted is I grouped different people into different groups. Different participants will encounter different information. There are 7 groups. So 1 plus 3 and times 3. The 1 is the control group, meaning the control group will only see the 3 fake photos. They will not see any fact-checking posts, but only the edited photos. And for the other 3, 2 times 3, the 3 means that they will see whether the report is actually from e-media, Weibo, or the other media news report outlet. So the fact-checking report is supposed to be originated from BU, but I hide it and not let the participants know about it. I change it to different news media outlet. So that is 3. And for 2, the number 2 group, these group of people will see one of the edited photos of 3 of that. So like partial reading about the edited post. So I will only let them read the 3 edited photos, but only read 1 post about the issues. So the result is that so when we talk about misinformation belief, for the control group, those that only read the false photos, 27% of them actually think the photos are false, and 40% of them think that they are partially false, and 10% think that they are totally true. For those claiming to be, I don't know whether the photo is true or not, account for 20%. But for full fact check, those that think the photos are totally false increase from 20% to 30%. For partially false also increase to 50%. For totally true, it drops to 7.5%. So if you know about social science, about like their statistics or the differences, there is a certain difference, but whether the difference is huge or not, it's up to you to decide. But at least on the degree of misinformation belief, you can see that there are different effects on that. Especially for the control group, a lot of the people actually say they don't know whether the photos are true or not. So this is misinformation belief. But for claim belief, so just as we've mentioned, even though those 3 pictures are false, some people who does not believe in what the mainland China uphold, they may still think that the gender falsification claim is true. So the report asks which statement the participants believe the most. The first one is, just now the post is false. Mainland China does not conduct false gender falsification in the competition. Another statement is, just now the post, it may be false, but Mainland China may really have done gender falsification in the contacts. Or just now the post is true, and Mainland China actually has conducted gender falsification in the competition. So only about 20%-ish from the control group believe with the first claim, but for the full fact check, the number actually rises to 40%. So to some extent, the fact checking actually to some extent has affected the claim belief of the participants. So there are some certain effects on the participants' claim belief. And another topic being asked is, so in general, ignoring the photo editing, do you think that Mainland China has conducted gender falsification, and the results are very likely to exist and very serious? Very likely to exist but should not be serious, probably exists but are rare cases. For the control group, those that think is very likely to exist have 20%. And for the full fact-checking group, it actually dropped to 16%. And for the control group, only 1.3% of people think that there are no gender falsification in Mainland China. So you can see that our experiment can slightly change the claim belief of the participants. But for background belief, the so-called background belief in this case is that the pictures is the misinformation belief, the pose and the claim is the claim belief, and the background belief is in general, are there many false information or false things or fraud in society, in Chinese society? So in my survey, I have to ask whether the participants agree with these sayings. The first one is, in Mainland China, governmental department quite commonly forge misinformation. And the next one is about business association, and the next one is about general public. So this is a background belief. Some of the people will have seen the pictures but without the post. Some of them will be in otherwise. So it will actually affect their background belief. Our results show that it's actually not that much of effect. The entire results of the study actually quite fulfill my original expectations. That since fact-checking is only fact-checking the most superficial layer of misinformation, so logically, after you fact-check those information, it should change those people with that certain layer of misinformation. But when you want to go deeper about their claim belief and even further deeper to affect their background belief is actually very difficult to done solely by fact-checking. Because background belief is actually very deep-rooted in different people. No matter you think is a bias or a subjective judgments, but background belief always relates to some really deep-rooted ideas in societies. Is not easily changed by just fact-checking. So this is the result. So in conclusion, fact-checking can indeed change the beliefs of people, but it really just lingered on misinformation belief. So fact-checking cannot really change the claim belief and background belief of a person. So to quickly conclude, my overall conclusion is about the value and function of fact-checking. First, fact-checking's function and value in society actually depends on the social situation. For example, when the society has a lot of gossips, actually there are three factors that actually form this whole gossiping surround there. The first one is uncertainty. When you encounter something that's really uncertain. And secondly is anxiety. When you are facing that uncertain situation, you will become anxious. And the third one is trust. Apart from uncertainty and anxiety, that person does not believe in the media posts, does not believe in their governmental organizations, then that person will therefore will never have an organization that help them to prove their claim. So if these three elements contain at the same time, then gossips or false information can really surround or circulate in the entire society. For example, like COVID before. At the beginning of COVID, a lot of people really easily enter this stage of uncertainty, anxiety, and mistrust. But when there are many gossips or false information, conducting fact-checking can therefore will have a more obvious value. But when the society is more peaceful, then the superficial function of fact-checking will therefore be less obvious. But of course, fact-checking still has their own function. So it really helps to clarify the information and to help keep records of authenticities of facts with fact-checking. My experiment has a limitations, or any other experiments actually have a limitation that the effect of them is not long-term. We cannot observe a long-term effect. So I believe if there are some fact-checking organizations that conduct fact-checking in long term, then to a certain extent, they will certainly have some effects on the society. Some scholars has do researches show that the existence of fact-checking itself can already pose effects on society. The research does not focus on what the fact-checking organization is doing, but they randomly send messages to different senators. So the control group receives a letter that does not really have something information, but for the other group, the letter tells the senators that, oh, there are some fact-checkers in society, you need to be careful. And after sending these letters, during the campaign period, the scholars then measure what those senators are actually saying. Then they realize for those who received that warning letter about being careful, the chances of these senators saying something relatively nonsense is actually really indeed lower. So the existence of fact-checking organizations indeed has a deterring effect. But traditionally speaking, the existence of media news themselves actually should have this deterring effect already. Since everything people say will be reported by the news media. So traditionally, news media should have the deterring effect as well. And my last slide. So at the beginning I mentioned about public policy ground. So when you write a public policy ground, you always need to write some public policy implications. When I read the reports, I often find these implications a bit unattainable. But when I conduct my project at the beginning, so everyone knows that there are limited resources of these fact-checking organizations. Of course, we can ask the public to donate, or if you want to ask the government organizations to support them, it's actually not that feasible, because for those international professional fact-checking networks often emphasize that professional fact-checkers should be independent from any proper institutions. So if one certain professional institution receives governmental funding, then it will be not recognized by IFC. So to retain the professionalism, direct funding from governmental or direct funding from any organization is not feasible. But when we talk about the public policies of Hong Kong, two areas that we can develop, for example, the media education is really important. Media education is something that the government should be promoting. Of course, they can collaborate with different fact-checking organizations as well when they conduct these education. Another direction is that hopefully the government actually listen to what the media has already promoted, but try to retain open and transparent about your information. Because at the end of the day, when you're doing fact-checking, there will have to be sources for it to date back in the first place. If the government organizations often non-disclose their information, it is not a good situation. Because when people want to actually try to clarify or fact-check some certain events, then they will not be able to trace back any sources. So this is a direction that I really need to emphasize. Hopefully the society can retain a stage of being open and transparent so that we can facilitate the work of fact-checking. Not only facilitate those fact-checkers actually, but actually facilitate the general public to know what is true and what is not. So this is the end of my sharing today. So thank you for Francis sharing. So I wonder if you all have any opinions about fact-checking. Therefore, we want to play a game. We have a few questions to ask. So please ready your phone. Scan the QR code. So for those sitting at the back, if you're not able to scan it, you may stand closer. So first question. Yeah, everyone can scan the QR code. For those sitting at the back, you may stand closer. We will begin our first question. First question is misinformation and disinformation severe in Hong Kong? Well, the results show that it is very severe. A lot of you all think so. Very serious, very severe. It seems that a lot of you all think that the situation is severe in Hong Kong. So second question. Does Hong Kong society have the tools, mechanisms, and knowledge to face the challenges of misinformation and disinformation? Do you think the challenge is big?
都強嘅喎，我唔強。
Strong, not yes, strong.
好，唔強。
Not strong, not strong. Lots of you pick not strong, so it seems that Hong Kong need to improve this area. So third question. The most challenging issues for Hong Kong citizens when doing fact-checking.
Okay. So
what we're asking is, what do you think is the biggest challenges for Hong Kong citizens when they try to do fact-checking? Is it because of policy issues? It is because of the misuse of digital media? There are different choices. You can pick the one you want the most. So a lot of them pick lack of knowledge source or control by big media. So thank you everyone for participating in the game. So let's take a group photo now, shall we? So we will have a co-reception. You can share and discuss your opinions with people around you. We have about 5 minutes for you to do the sharing. After the group discussion, Francis will then conduct a question and answer section. So you have 5 minutes to discuss. Feel free to discuss with the people around you about the topic just now.
以往我哋有啲機會咧做公眾互動咧，我哋通常就
We conduct different public events back then. We will do it for about 3 to 4 hours so that you can actually chat long in different group discussions. But because of a time constraint, we're not able to do it today. But maybe next time. So we have prepared 2 guests to interact with Francis. First, we have Stanley. So let's pass our time to him. So thank you for offering me the chance to chat with Francis. So let's bring up my question first. I want to ask, through fact-checking, how can we change or guarantee or protect the freedom of press in Hong Kong? It is a very serious topic that maybe you just briefly answer in 3 seconds. So the reason I bring up this question is because of 2 stories I have. First story is that I am actually one of the person being fact-checked. So over the 20 decades, I will publish something on the news media. And a lot of my works are actually not being published. But there will be some journalists or reporters ask the truth of the things I write. And 3 years ago, my reports were published, and then a journalist asked and said that one statement I made within the context is actually true. After that, over the 2 and 3 years, when I write, I will often include a hyperlink for something that I write importantly. But usually they will not publish my link. But for example, just now I've published something about the over expenditure of governmental workshops. Then I include it in my writing, and then I include the link. So that's why I say that I'm one of the person being fact-checked. It is a good thing because it means that everything I got published will be true. But a few days ago, I hang out with 3 people. One of them is an experienced journalist, another 2 is experienced editors. I tell them that I pay close attention to the freedom of press. And I ask them, I think that the freedom of press is under pressure, and I think about what's actually the most important. For example, if the economic situation in Hong Kong is not good, then of course we need to find supporter. But for freedom of press, there are some certain elements. For example, are there not journalists that are brave enough, or do we not have enough fundings, or thirdly, is it because of the bosses, they are not daring enough to publish what they want? And I also asked that, are you guys actually being restrained by the government? The answer they gave me is actually related to the topic today. They actually want to know the red line, like where is the freedom of press, so that they will know what they can write and what they cannot. So it's actually related to something around this week. So how soft is your confrontation? As a journalist, how soft can they actually be? Where is the boundary? Where is the limitation? Another similar question is how true your information is. So it is obvious that those so-called true information and the situation when there are often misinformation online, it is very important for us to do fact-checking, since it's very important to our freedom of press. Just now you had mentioned about politics, government politics. So I think that we can formulate some more concrete ideas or direction, no matter it's for the general public or for the government to make reference on. So thank you. So Francis, okay, I'll answer it first. So it is a really broad topic. So let me put it this way. If we try to stick to our topic today, it's difficult to really correlate fact-checking with freedom of press. But if I broaden it and mention about facts itself, in the social context of Hong Kong right now, what facts has become? So just sharing. Actually, I have Choi Ji-kyun to help him write some columns in Mingpao. I help him to write some columns that account for like 700-ish words. In mid-June, I actually write about a survey that I conducted last year, an interview on Hong Kong journalists. In the survey, we ask how the journalists view what fact is. So if we put it academically, we actually ask about the journalist epistemology. An interesting finding from the survey is that one of the questions I asked, do you agree that facts needs to be interpreted? Over like 90% of them agree that facts needs to be interpreted. Another question I ask, do you agree that journalists should let facts speak themselves? Around 90% of people agree again. But it's actually very interesting. These two statements are actually contradictory. Because if you let facts speak themselves, then it means that the facts will be able to speak themselves. You don't need to interpret it because they have a clear idea of themselves to be spoken. Facts must be interpreted. In philosophical, we call it a subjective theory. It is a very abstract idea. If you think that, oh, it's not raining outside, this itself is already an interpretation because you have a common language to interpret that situation into a saying. So this is actually a form of interpretation as well. So these two statements should be contradictory. And how come we have 90% of people agree with them at the same time? But of course, journalists are not philosophers. So they just simply agree and not agree with the statement. But for the first statement, does fact need to be interpreted? If you ask this question, most of the journalists are inclined to agree with it because they think that facts needs to be interpreted because that's my job as a journalist. It actually shows how important journalists are. So if I am a journalist, I will have the reason to be inclined to this saying because they need to be interpreted. And as a journalist, my background knowledge, my judgment, my ability in interpreting information become important. Therefore, journalists will be inclined to agree with this saying. And with this situation, why will they agree with facts being able to speak themselves? So to my understanding, I think it's related to the situation of Hong Kong now. Since if you say that facts is speaking themselves, then it means that the fact is not related to me. I'm just publishing it. I'm just reporting it. People is actually putting a distance of themselves to the fact if they agree with the second statement. So this statement is actually a defensive function that's important to the journalists nowadays. A lot of media outlets nowadays tend to use statistic figures to do their reports. They really like to count things. Back then, it's not that popular because it's quite time-consuming. Like we try to count like back in the days, people counting how many people participate in the legislative meeting is actually very time-consuming. But with it being done, it becomes a very concrete and solid information. So therefore, a lot of media outlets phoned me and asked my opinions. Back in the days when journalists asked me questions, it will be like, oh, something happened. What are your comments on that? But within these years, the journalists are more like, they tend to provide all the figures that they have calculated first with all these facts. Then they will ask my opinions on the issue. So we can see that the emphasis on the facts becomes stronger nowadays. Back in the days, we really just be like, oh, if you want to comment something, then just comment something. But nowadays, it changes. You can see that people sensibly try to find more facts to support their ideas. So, to what extent can fact-checking actually help the freedom of press? I am actually not that sure because it is a very broad topic that got affected by different elements and factors. So it's not just a few fact-checking organizations will be able to affect. But with your question, I therefore want to pick up this topic and mention about how fact has evolved and become with the social media and the social situation nowadays. A lot of times we need to stick to the facts or even buy in to the facts itself in order to protect ourselves. So this is what I come up with after I hear your question. So let's invite another person to ask the questions. It is a former dean of the Poly Universities. It's been a while since I participated in these kind of events, but what Professor Lee has just talked about 90% of that I actually agree with you. So I don't really need to raise my own challenges or things like that. Therefore, I want to talk about another thing instead. I really agree with what Professor Lee has said at the end. Nowadays, in this post-truth era, education is very important. The issue is that, to some extent, with the development of the entire global society, especially the more generalization of social media news and the dynamics of politics, their polarization, there are a lot of controversial topics. And there will always be two groups of people taking very opposite tactics to these controversial issues. Those so-called facts may never be effective in handling these controversies. But of course, facts have their own function. They are very important. Just now, I watched the election of American president election. So when the president candidates were talking, at the end of the day, Trump won by a long lead, while Harris was actually talking something not very relevant. They're actually not that quite different in their speech. Trump is actually even worse. He can actually make up something that's not true. So results show that even though we have fact-checking, for example, during the election, we have fact-checking to see which president candidate saying is more true, but it seems obvious that a person with even the slightest hint of rationales will know that Trump is actually being ridiculous, but he won at the end. So, can pure fact-checking really solve these social controversials? I don't think so. It's a bit difficult, especially around the world, not just in Hong Kong or America. There is a deficit in trust. People tend to not trust each other anymore. I think we need to do more work on education. I think it's not a must, but I think those with higher levels of education tend to be more inclusive about different opinions. They will tend to not find a definite black and white answers. If they want to learn more about the issues, they will have their ability to find more information. But of course, I know a lot of people with lower level education. I know a lot of people with high education being very stubborn. But in general, those people with high education tend to be more open-minded in general. They are less biased and less stubborn. So this is the first point. So therefore, in this post-truth era, only by increasing our level of education that we will be able to help. But of course, it is a very long-term work. And I want to add on just now what Professor Lee has said, that every fact needs to be interpreted. And facts will speak themselves. These two sayings, to some extent, I think they have their own contradictions. But at the same time, it really depends on when these sayings appear, in what context. Sometimes it may not be that contradictory. But if you say that they are contradicted, I think it's actually the figures. Like, figures need to be interpreted and figures can speak themselves. This is actually the contradictions. When I studied my UG, I read about how to define statistics. It becomes a classic now, but a lot of people can lie with statistics. So only with a certain level of education can the people differentiate what information is reliable or not. And statistics actually needs people to interpret them in order to be meaningful. But if we interpret or if we take figures into a fact, it's a more difficult issue now, because even in the philosophical field, I don't think they have a consensus about this topic. However, in general, in this post-truth era, there are a lot of misinformation. It's very ridiculous to me. Just a few days ago, I saw a picture on Facebook about two very beautiful birds, but obviously those birds were fake because the feathers is just knotted. It's like a costume of a certain ethnic group. It looks really beautiful. However, you know that the Yunnan rituals does not have these kind of costumes. But for some reason, there are really just some people who are obsessed with making these misinformation to gain attention. A lot of people create these fake or misinformation to change the direction of society, but some of them are just really out of nowhere. And even with AI nowadays, it makes the process more convenient. So back in the days when I scroll on Facebook, things were much more simpler. But now when I scroll on the information in Facebook, I actually need to think before and actually think whether the information is true or not. The world has become more messy now, but at the same time more interesting, because it actually creates some new perspectives for you to feel things. The world is getting messier, but hopefully we can gradually adapt to this world, since the world cannot be changed. So fact-checking is something that you can only do after something happened. It can never lead the trend of the entire world or even change it, but still it is something that we need to do. So we can only try our best to do it, and the trend cannot be changed anyway. So to briefly respond, just now we've mentioned, even in my talk, that a lot of times it is difficult to make a judgment about how fact-checking can improve the society. If we set an expectation so high, then it is inevitable that we will find it difficult to achieve in some extent. For example, using Trump's election as an example, something fact-checking cannot change is the entire culture of the society, whether they respect facts or not, because it is an attitude. The culture of whether they respect facts. It is actually a political culture. It is not something that fact-checking can change. A lot of professional media news press in the United States actually have made their comments, but still they cannot change the entire culture of the United States. Therefore, it brings us back to the point that what fact-checking can do is a very concrete and solid work, but with those social issues and social situations, it is then something that fact-checking cannot really change. But if we bring back to the topic mentioned by Stanley about the freedom of press, so over the 1 and 2 years, of course, I've conducted different researches about freedom of press, but we will still have an idea that let's not just talk about Hong Kong or mainland China, but if there is a not very favorable situation to freedom of press, when we try to conduct work in this environment, the work will sometimes become a form of preservation. That they like the year before, I asked a journalist from the mainland China. He said that there are a lot of things that he cannot do in mainland China nowadays, but what he is trying to do right now is that he actually wants to retain and preserve this craftsmanship, these skills in media reporting. He doesn't think what he done can actually change the society because it's actually quite unattainable, but he hoped that he can preserve something. I believe a lot of journalists in Hong Kong have similar ideas now. Journaling is not about how much they write every day now or how much they can change the world. If you possess such a mindset about changing the world with your own publishments, it will very easily for you to get frustrated. Just now, an experienced journalist chatted with me. He's my friend. I'm gonna keep him anonymous. But he often comments about Hong Kong public policies online. But this journalist told me that what I write nowadays are all very similar. Like some of them can gain quite a big attention, but at the end of the day, the government still won't take my words. It's very frustrating. But then I tell her, it is what it is. You are still trying to change it. If you continue to write more, the less they will try to do. Because it's you, a journalist, who's talking about it, so of course the government will not listen to it. I jokingly say. But maybe at least you can take your word as a form of preservation. For example, we talk about education. When you teach people, you need to have materials, you need to have examples, right? So what you're doing actually is preserving a group of people with different abilities. For example, fact-checking, different abilities. It's actually a form of preservation to fact-checking. So if you take your work as a form of preservation, then what you're doing right now is still attainable. It's not just about making any social impact anymore, because objectively speaking, the situation is not that favorable anymore. It is a problem of political culture. Even if you mention in like Middle East countries, it's even way deeper issues and problems. Of course, fact-checking cannot change that. So I think in the realistic sense, the expectation we put right now should be that we are actually preserving a form of thinking or a practice of clarifying facts. So in that sense, no matter it's fact-checking or news reporting, they're actually doing really important work. I want to ask a question. Professor, I want to ask, so you mentioned about fact-checking today, but you didn't really mention about the post-truth era. Actually, I'm not that familiar with this topic. Can you tell me, when does this era happen? Is it only in Hong Kong, in Asia, or in the entire world? And is it before the post-truth era that we don't need fact-checking? So post-truth is actually a term that published 6 to 7 years ago by economists. But it's difficult for us to pinpoint a definite time frame when this term actually started arising. It's not related to Trump, right? Trump is actually like an indicator that shows how serious that matter is. But of course, it's not just about himself. There are more people other than him. But if I have to explain what is post-truth era, then what I emphasize is that the so-called post-truth, to put it simply, it will be when the society is getting more difficult to form a consensus about truth. It's never easy to form the consensus, but what we imagine and understand that in 20 years ago, back in the day, society and the people in society will have a consensus about facts. And based on the facts, they will therefore have different interpretations and different understandings. And people will not question these facts, these truths. But nowadays, what we see is that a lot of people don't have consensus about very basic truths. For example, just like my presentation just now, I've mentioned I have posted different pictures just now to let people read, but there are still some people who find it being true. Like some people just refuse to accept what they see before their eyes. So this is on one hand. And another thing is that another characteristics of post-truth era is that there is no constraining power between facts and truth. So the so-called constraining power is that traditionally, fact is something that controls what we speak as a public figure. Can you really lie in front of the public? Just now we've mentioned about the American president election. So just like the Trump and Harris example, do they actually know if there are people fact-checking what they're speaking? They actually do, because the election debate has been done for so many years already. But Trump and Harris still don't care about that and speak whatever they want. And this whatever attitude is a very defining character of post-truth era. It's not just about people lying, but the fact that people don't mind people knowing they are lying. This is something very different than the past. Politicians always lie, like it's common to happen among them. Sometimes they will lie, like when they are conducting like social movements and stuff like that. It is common for politicians to lie, however, in the past or not within like this post-truth era. Even when you lie, you don't want people to know about it, and therefore you will limit yourself from speaking even bigger lies. But situations arising in different countries nowadays is that people don't care about what they say anymore. They don't care about the consequences as well. Even some of my friends will comment saying that, oh, those KOLs nowadays really don't care what they're doing. They really don't care about the consequences and pretend that something never happened after weeks later. Therefore, we joke and say that we cannot become KOLs because KOLs has to be that bold to be totally uncare about what they're trying to say, whether they're right or wrong. And after a week, totally forget about the thing they say. This is actually an ability. But post-truth era actually is like a culture about the situation that we are in right now. If we don't talk about post-truth, but something opposite about truth, I have a book that I really like. It is written by a Russian scholar studied in the States. The book is about the media changes in Russia, called Losing Pravda. It means truth in Russian. So it is actually a really important truth or media press name publications back in Russia called Pravda. So Losing Pravda talks about different areas of Russia, the changes within these areas as well. The book raises a saying about the culture of truth, like what is truth? In different era, in different society, we actually never know whether the truth is true or not. To put it in a more philosophical way or in a more abstract way, the science show us that world is actually created with Big Bang, but can you really tell that people years later will not change this saying? So the so-called culture of truth is not about us having the truth, but the cultural characteristics instead, that people will actually do what they say. They will not be self-contradictory. People will be sincere about what they say. He mentioned a few basic characteristics about people, like sincerity. So it's actually a commitment. It's not just about whether we know the truth or not, but whether people has a commitment to truth. So post-truth era talks about how people nowadays got dominated by the sense that they are not committed to the truth, and this is like the characteristics of post-truth era. Any more questions? So I want to ask two sides. First thing is, in post-truth era, with social media being so popular, it is difficult for us to show fact-checking anymore because of how people are obsessed with getting attention. So in this situation, how can we make fact-checking have a more bigger influence? Second thing is about the public. We often rely on the reliability of the fact-checking organizations. How does other fact-checking organizations in other countries make their fact-checking organizations be more influential or be more reliable? Because just now the PowerPoint showed a lot about the functions, about whether fact-checking is important or not, but what about the reliability? So let me answer in another order. Answer the second question first. Just now I've mentioned about reliability, so it has different layers. The first one is on a national level. We have different institution buildings to conduct fact-checking. For example, the IFNC in the States we've mentioned. So this will help to improve the reliability of the fact-checking organizations. We have mentioned the organizations in Hong Kong, the fact-checking organizations in Hong Kong. Two of them are actually from universities. Since they belong to a university, so to some extent it makes them being reliable as well. And in my project, it includes a population survey asking the general public questions about how they value or comment on the reliability of fact-checking organizations. And the results are actually not bad. So it shows that Hong Kong citizens in general have a certain level of trust to the fact-checking organizations in Hong Kong. In general, no matter it is news media outlet or the universities, the general credibility is not low. So at least with the specialism in Hong Kong right now, at least fact-checking is still able to create a certain extent of effects. Of course, not every Hong Kong citizens know about fact-checking. It's hard to control. Or there will be those people who don't care about it in post-truth era, but at least we are able to conduct or have a fact-checking practice with professionalism in there. So in Hong Kong, generally, these fact-checking organizations has their own reputation and credibility. Another question is about the attentions. Therefore, we often say that fact-checking is not the only solution to the things happening in post-truth era. A few months ago, I interviewed a worker from Hong Kong media. That person is responsible for looking through different figures in backstage about the numbers and figures online. For example, when we try to talk about something more politics in Hong Kong nowadays, for example, about Lai Chih-ying, his case, that person comments in a relatively calm tone, saying that if I post this news on the day when the news about Diaz, the Taiwan artist, passed away, my news will definitely not be able to get attention if it's posted alone. But if I relate it to the death of the artist, then it would definitely got bigger and more attention. So this is the situation that we are in right now. However, it actually really relates to the social atmosphere now. The atmosphere now makes people think that public discussion is not that important anymore. It seems a bit meaningless because it's futile. It cannot change anything. So, like I said, there are a lot of things that are deep-rooted. We cannot easily change them. So, therefore, it brings back to what we have mentioned just now about preservation. A lot of changes on social level are not that easy to be changed by different social organizations. These organizations like fact-checking, news media, if they fuel it with a preservation mindset, like the work they do are actually helping to preserve some of the capacity of the society, then when the general environment is able to have a change, the capacity will therefore do its work. A lot of societies, even in Hong Kong in past decades, there are a lot of ups and downs. But if some people are able to preserve certain things, and when the environment actually change, then the capacity will be useful. A lot of other countries have similar situations. So this is how I'm going to answer the questions with the situation nowadays. The problem is so big. It is on such a big global level, and it's so deep-rooted. So it will be very easy for you to draw an inevitable conclusion saying that, oh, the effort of humans is actually very little. So therefore, I think we need to change the entire framework instead of just thinking about how to change it. So that at least what you're doing right now is actually helping us to preserve what we value. The world is changing, the society is changing. At this point, you may not find what you're doing useful, but maybe sometimes later when the environment changes, your work will actually be effective. So this is how I'm going to answer the question. So this is the event today is coming to the end, and thank you for Francis sharing. I also have a few things to add on. Just now, a few months ago, we have published a journal related to social science and culture. Two of the writers is Danny and George. They are present here. So if you're about it, you may find them to sign it. Another thing is we actually need more of your participation, no matter is your donation or your work. We have a donation box here. You may support us. And lastly, we have a questionnaire about the event today. You may scan the QR code and give us some feedbacks. So I'll give you 2 minutes to finish the questionnaire.
So
when you're doing the questionnaire, at the back we have some refreshments that you may enjoy after the event. So after you have finished the questionnaire, you may feel free to chat or go to refreshments. So thank you, everyone.